And I think we're live. Yes. Apologies about that, team. As per usual, true to form, we started with a technical error. So we're keeping it consistent for 2020. Happy New Year, by the way, everyone. Happy New Year. I hope you had a good Christmas break. While we're waiting for people to join us, I'll just let you know what we're going to talk about today because we've got a bit to cover. I want to talk about this Colin Trevorrow Star Wars leaked script. What does it all mean? Would it have been any good? I know some of this, I'm a bit late to some of this news. I want to talk about Apple TV, I guess streaming in general, and I've been watching For All Mankind, the TV series, which shouldn't be called For All Mankind, but we'll get into that in a minute. I want to talk about a little quick HBO update. That should be a new segment, the HBO update. The Obi Wan TV series is now on indefinite hold, which does not sound good. That sounds like something the doctor tells you that you've got that you don't want. I'm sorry, sir, you have indefinite hold. So Obi Wan is on indefinite hold. What does that mean? I want to do a quick review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I've finally got to see it. Share my thoughts on that. An article I came across a couple of days ago about the Doomsday Clock. Apparently, you should start panicking. We're about to die. We'll talk about that. And then the last couple of things I want to talk about to wrap up today are Luke Skywalker. Watching a television series, and probably some of you have already seen it, but I won't go into too many details now, but it's interesting. There's clearly Mark Hamill's in this TV series, and he's playing a better Luke Skywalker than the Luke Skywalker we got in the new trilogy. And lastly, Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes, and a couple of... before we get into any of that, though, and start talking about any of those stories, just a quick vinyl update. Because over the Christmas holiday period, I got some Christmas money, and so I've added a few vinyls to the collection. I went looking on sales and a few other places. So let me just give you a quick update. U2, the best of. This is the first one from 1980 to 1990. This is the best album, by the way, in that series. That's a new vinyl. I'm sort of conflicted about new vinyls because of the fact that they often digitise recordings, and so they're not the same as the analogues, but there's still something to be said for the music itself. I'm not like a total die-hard audio snob or anything like that. The Cure, Greatest Hits, double LP, again, just like the U2 one. There's some good songs on that Cure double LP. This is the newish David Bowie double LP, Legacy. It's actually quite good, this one. It's got a really good selection of hits. 2 LPs, 4 sides again. And it's even got Lazarus, which is a great song off his the last album that he released at his death, same time. So those are the... Are they the other new ones? Let me see what... Oh, yes, there's one more, sorry. This is new. Legend, the best of Bob Marley and the Wailers. Love Bob Marley and the Wailers. And that's the end of the newbies. So let me play you the second-hand. Let me show you the second-hand greats that I scored. So first of all, there is The Police, Every Breath You Take, the singles. This is a great album, hard to get a hold of too, actually. And I got this. Unfortunately, I bought it secondhand off a website that I normally use. It's kind of like our version of eBay in New Zealand called Trade Me. And the seller had advertised that he'd done what you call graded listening, where you listen to it, listen to the album, and they give it a grading. There's a couple of international standards you can use. And he claimed it was in top, very good plus condition after graded listening, but I don't think he listened to it because there were a couple of scratches. But I was able, to his credit, he actually gave me a partial refund when I sent him the photos and said, here's the problem. So The Police, Every Breath You Take, that's a cracker. Some of these, why I like this album is because there's a version of Don't Stand So Close to Me from the 86 version, which is not as commonly played. And also, I really, really love I Can't Stand Losing You and Roxanne. I love Roxanne because I have this awesome memory from my childhood. When I was really young, I started quite young in bands, and I was in a band, and we went to this gig. It was like one of those sort of outdoor concert things. It was outside a supermarket, and there was this all-girl band from the local girls' high school. They were really good, actually, and they played Roxanne by the Police, and man, I still remember that. Phenomenal. The Best of the Eagles. This is the 1970s LP, and this is good. Take It Easy, Peaceful, Easy Feeling, Desperado, Tequila Sunrise, Best of My Love, Lion Eyes, Take It to the Limit, One of These Nights, Hotel California, New Kid in Town, Life in the Fast Lane, Heartache Tonight, and The Long Run. That's a really good LP. And last two, I got a series of classical albums. We were on holiday week before last with some friends of ours, and we went into like this big, massive second-hand junk store, and they had an LP section, and I got 6 Ralph Vaughan Williams albums for $1 each. Now, Ralph Vaughan Williams, for those who don't know, some of you might, he's a classical composer from England. He fought in World War One. He came home from World War One, and then he found his composing voice later in life. It's not common that happens, apparently. His first compositions, I think, were even his late 30s, 40s. But his phenomenal composer. You might have heard of a track called The Lark Ascending, which is sort of one of his more famous ones. But I encourage everyone to listen to this one, his Symphony No. 5 in D major, especially the third movement. It is just phenomenal, like absolutely phenomenal. When I first played it to my kids, they said to me, "Dad, what movie is that from?" They thought it was a film soundtrack. Not. And lastly, and this is the one I'm really happy with, is Midnight Oil, Diesel and Dust. This is one of the best albums to ever come out of Australia. And this album, certainly in my country here in New Zealand anyway, it holds its value. It's hard to get a hold of. When you do get a hold of a copy, you see them in record stores. They're sort of $5. They're generally sort of around 40. I've seen them as high as $50 mark. And that's just for a reasonable quality second-hand one. So I saw this one online, and the guy wanted $20 for it, which is the cheapest I've ever seen it. And he promised it was in really good condition. So I bought it thinking if it just plays and there's no scratches and it's okay, I'm happy with that. I don't expect the earth. Well, it arrived and it is in phenomenal condition. You can't really tell by looking at it on that camera, I know, but the album sleeve is in, like, it's still in real good as new condition. And not only is the LP is mint. It's hard to believe it's even been played before I got it. But also inside was this poster that came with the album, with one particular version of the album. It's still in there, totally mint. So I was really, really happy when I saw that and played it. It's unbelievable. This album is worth a lot more than $20. So yeah, I was pretty happy with that. For those who don't know Midnight Oil, if you're from the States or the UK and you've never heard of Midnight Oil, Beds Are Burning was one of their big tracks. I know it was big in the USA. A lot of people know Beds Are Burning, but there's a really good song on this album called Put Down That Weapon. The whole album's really good. This is the album you should listen to, probably, of theirs. But there's a track called Put Down That Weapon, which was about nuclear weapons, and it's a really great track. I used to love it when I was younger. Anyway, so there you go. That's vinyl update. Some new vinyls and second-hand vinyls added to the collection. Let's jump into it now that we've got a few more people on board. Colin Trevorrow, Star Wars. So the script gets leaked, and Colin Trevorrow has offered us his vision of no way. Oh, Doc 077 has said Brendan, latest vinyl treasures found at second-hand bookstore. Johnny Cash live at Folsom and Perry Como Christmas album. Johnny Cash live at Folsom, man, that's a good album. I want to add that to my collection. Yeah, big fan of Johnny Cash, thanks to my father, by way of my father. But yeah, that's a good album. Good man. C-Jams said a lot of stuff from my youth right there. Good man. You obviously had a good youth then, a good upbringing. I also got a copy of brand new copy of Seventh Son of a Seventh Son by I say Midnight Oil by Iron Maiden, and the first and best progressive metal album ever released. My kids love it. My daughters are asking for tracks from that on their MP3 players now, so I think I'm doing okay as a father. I should write a book. Anyway, Colin Trevorrow, Star Wars. Where were we? Yeah, Up the Irons. They're coming to New Zealand and Australia soon, actually. And it's funny, ironically, we found out my kids also love Pseudo Echo. I've put them onto Pseudo Echo, and they love Pseudo Echo. We discovered they're coming to New Zealand as well in March, I think, which is kind of surprising. Anyway, Colin Trevorrow, Star Wars. So the script gets released, and there's an interesting situation here for me. Is reading bits of it. You can definitely see, wow, I think there's a very compelling vision there. Someone has pointed out the issue of Princess Leia and the death of Carrie Fisher, and how would that affect the script? I think that's a really good question. I think, though, there's a bit of what I would call Rise of Skywalker fever going on, and that Rise of Skywalker was just such a mess, and it's the end of the trilogy. It brings an end to that trilogy, and the whole thing is a mess. It's such a disappointment. It wasn't even so much a failed attempt. It's just a hot mess of stuff that's sort of all chucked together over 3 movies. And so what happens is, in those situations, I think it's really tempting to cling to any port in a storm, and you think, man, Colin Trevorrow, this would have been amazing. And I've heard people talking about this Colin Trevorrow version and how it would have been amazing and it would have been the most phenomenal film ever. Look, the chances are it might have been better than The Rise of Skywalker. It might have been. We don't know, because obviously it hasn't been made. It could have been. And there's things in the script, that's for sure, that were interesting. However, it's Colin Trevorrow. Like, have people forgotten Jurassic World? And I went to see that film in the movies with a mate of mine, thinking, this, I guess hoping for something, especially after all the hype that was around about that film, and it was such a disappointment. So, yeah. I'm not convinced that it would have been actually a great film. Certainly not the hype that some people are suggesting, but possibly I think it could have been. Here's Ebenhawk says here. Colin's script would have tied things together better with the whole saga. And I think that's definitely a possibility that could have happened. And that's assuming that he got to make it as we see the script. It's assuming that there's no studio interference and all those other kind of things. It's assuming that under the pressure of making that film and everything else that was going on, that he didn't crack. Like, it's very easy. I think you can see with The Rise of Skywalker that, to a sense, in certain ways, you could say J.J. Abrams probably cracked a little bit under the pressure. That they made decisions, or the studio did anyway, even if it's not J.J. They made decisions to put things into that film in a sort of weird shotgun approach, where it was like some sort of weird exercise in market research, where they went and looked at what they thought the fans were saying, did some focus groups, and said, well, people like the whole Raylo thing, that's a thing, but put some of that in there, and people hated what Rian Johnson did, so we've got to sort of pour some cold water on that. And it was just sort of this hodgepodge of stuff trying to appeal to the broadest group possible, and so it's quite conceivable that Trevorrow's film would have suffered the same fate, and that the whole thing would have been turned into an absolute mess. And like I said, Jurassic World is not a good film. It's just not a good film. And so the idea that Colin Trevorrow would have done something better than JJ, I think at best he could have matched him and maybe made something that had things that were tied together better, or moments that were slightly better. I don't know. But I don't think it would have been better. I don't see a track record there to back that up. And as I said, you've got a script, but when you actually make something like that and you're under pressure and you've got you're working 1 million hours a day to try and create a movie. I've never done it, but I imagine it must be pretty intense. You read the stories who have done it, and it's like an intense cauldron, and you've got all these pressures on you, and financial pressures, and the studios probably would come calling for their pound of flesh. So it's one thing to say, away from the heat of battle and the peace and quiet with no obligations and no stress on you, that this is what I would have done and it would have been amazing, but whether it actually would have turned out that way, yeah, that's a whole nother story. So yeah, I'm colour me skeptical, because I think that The Last Jedi, the problems with The Rise of Skywalker and with that trilogy are not simply with The Rise of Skywalker. That they start well before that, and The Last Jedi is a big factor. So is The Force Awakens, but really The Last Jedi just stymied everything. The fact that they've got 3 different creators involved in the process, I don't think would have helped. I don't think that would have helped anything at all. And there's another thing that was interesting to me. One of my patrons on Patreon, by the way, huge thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon, and for those who continue to support the channel. If you want to, there's a PayPal link below where you can chuck in something in the tip jar. Every little bit helps, thank you. But one of my patrons on Patreon, Gordon Bradbury, sent me a link to the J.J. Abrams Reddit. Let me see if I can bring this up. Probably a lot of you have seen this, but it's almost a month old now. Funny, a month seems like ages ago, doesn't it now? How time moves so fast. Here's what I've been told from a source that worked on The Rise of Skywalker, and basically they go through how those who leaked stuff had an agenda, an anti-J.J. Abrams agenda, right? And probably a lot of you have seen this. Well, the first thing I thought of when I saw the Colin Trevorrow script leaks were, is this part of that as well? Is this yet another attempt to try and really sort of pour salt into the wounds and to have a go at J.J. Abrams? If the conspiracy theory is true and Disney really is trying to stifle his possibility of working at DC and things like that, then this could be yet another attempt to put a nail in the coffin, by the whole Trevorrow thing becomes a look at this guy would have made a better movie, so don't hire him. So yeah, I'm skeptical that it would have been better. I don't think there's enough of a track record there to back that up. Morden Gray says, when I hear about the new content, as much as I'd like to see their new content, I don't want the writers/creators screwing around with stories they only particularly understand or don't. I guess they don't particularly understand or don't care about. And that's the thing. I don't know if anyone here has seen Red Letter Media's latest video. They've posted a review of the first episode of Picard, and it's quite funny. And because Mike and who is it? It was Mike and Rich, who are both diehard Star Trek fans, and they make that interesting point in their video. G'day, what? They make the interesting point in their video that you've got people writing who don't really understand Star Trek, and it's, I think, the same is true of Star Wars, but they have these, that they will put things in. They make a joke at one point in their video about a laser whip, and they wouldn't understand where the laser whip has come from in the history of Star Trek, but they'd be like, hey, a laser whip, that's a cool thing, let's put that in. And I think that's probably a lot of the mentality now is, and funnily enough, there's a fascinating philosophical question behind this. Why is this? Why is writing the way it is? I think a big factor is the culture that we're living in. I really do. I'm absolutely convinced of that. That a culture that has lost touch with the big story about itself and about the bigger stuff out there, God, the divine, doesn't have a story there, and in our case has embraced relativism. How do you tell the smaller stories, the mythologies? You can't. I don't think you can tell them very well, and you get sort of flashes of it. And what those flashes of good mythology that appear in storytelling, they harken back to a former time or to the big story. So there's that aspect. But then there's also the aspect of, I think, the technology now with filmmaking. You can do just about anything with a film. I mean, they've proved that now. You can have a total CG character. Think of Thanos. In a film, that's sort of, at this point, it's limitless. You can bring back dead people and stick them in films. So what that means is, I think that on the writing side of it, there's got to be a temptation now to think more along those superficial special effects big flashbang, neon signs. Look at this, amazing! You know, all the spectacle and not so much of the show. So all the spectacle, not so much of the substance. And so it must be very tempting in the writing to fall prey to that as well, because you've got this technology that can back you up to do just about anything. And so that becomes more of a focus, like, how can we push the envelope, rather than what should really be the focus, which is, how do we tell a good story? How do we actually have substance? How do we have a story that's meaningful, that brings something good, true, and beautiful to the world? How do we tell a story that actually contributes positively? It doesn't have to be deep and meaningful. It could be a kid's story. But when you watch that, the world is made better in some way. People somehow are drawn, their gaze is drawn out of the mud, so to speak, and upwards. You know, like, and that should be the primary aim of things, I think. But I think that's largely been lost. And I think there's no doubt, probably, that, you know, that's one of the big factors here that plays into the way this sort of storytelling works. So yeah, to go back to your original point, Morden Gray, it is people who perhaps don't even understand the content, but it's the whole flash and bang of the industry that's more important to them. The continuity question, that's right, Morden Gray raises again. The people in charge of timelines, canon, continuity are either complete idiots or no one is listening to them. Well, remember what Disney did. They completely scrubbed the canon. They scrubbed the canon of Star Wars, of all that extra material, which was canon. And we know why they did it. They did it because they had this big financial fantasy that they would create something new and make lots of money, and there wouldn't be any of this interference from other things that would get in the way. They just have a blank slate. And so they had no excuse at all. They had a total blank slate to do what they wanted to, but still, this is what we got. Oh, yeah, here we go. Stefan says, I think there is still a lot of good storytelling, just we should not look for it in the mainstream, big corporate products made for mass consumption. And I think that's probably fair, because I've watched stuff recently. I watched a film the other night that I didn't even know existed until I watched it. It was called Fighting With My Family, and it's a British film with a bit of American crossover, based on the true story about a young British girl and her working class family. Dad was a crim, had been in jail. Mum was a drug addict before she married Dad. Beautiful story, and they get into wrestling, you know, professional wrestling. And she ends up trying out and becoming, was it the youngest diva in WWE or WWE, I think, isn't it, world history. And it's her story, and it's written by Stephen Merchant, who helped co-write The Office, the British version of The Office. It's got Nick Frost in it. Nick Frost? No, not Nick Frost. I can't remember his name now. The lady who from Game of Thrones is the mum. It's funny, it's well acted. Vince Vaughn is in it. The Rock has a couple of brief cameos in it. And it's great storytelling. It was really good stuff. The kind of stuff where you think, man, there's no major special effects or anything like that. It's not. And the thing is, the tragedy, I guess, is something like that just slips under the radar, whereas we get bombarded. And really, this is the thing. I was reading somewhere today that Netflix and Apple are looking at buying MGM Studios, the studio that owns Bond, the Bond franchise. And my first thought was, oh no, not another corporate acquisition in the entertainment arena. It's just, like, corporate Hollywood has always been a thing, and corporate interference. You can go back and read the history of Hollywood and see that. But man, it seems it's got worse and worse now, and it's become the lowest common denominator, especially now thanks to social media. Whereas one expert from Silicon Valley in a book I was reading recently said, we're involved in a race to the bottom of the brainstem. And with social media in Silicon Valley, that's our race. We're racing to the bottom of the brainstem. All we want is your click. That's all we want. We want you to look at it and go, oh, I better click on that. And so that race to the bottom of the brainstem is also now just so much of the sort of corporate entertainment culture as well. And so, that's a fair point, Stefan, that you go outside of the mainstream. I haven't seen Parasite yet, and a lot of people are raving to me about Parasite, and they're saying, you've got to watch this. I have seen that filmmaker's other movies, so we'll see, but I've heard good things about it. Stefan says, thanks for answering without super chat. That's fine, mate. I try and answer anyone I can. Obviously, if 100 million comments are flying, I can't see all of them at once, but anyway. Hello from Bulgaria, Eastern Europe. Wow, hello, my friend. The free Bulgaria now, isn't it? Formerly under that awful Soviet tyrannical regime. Anyway, let's move on. Apple TV and streaming in general, and I want to talk about for all mankind. So I was thinking about this the other day because we bought a new device the other day, and if you've bought a new device, you know you get Apple TV now. You get a year of it for free. This is how they're trying to hook people, and so I finally got to look at. Oh, g'day Jeremy, welcome aboard. I finally got to have a look at Apple TV. So here's the thing: I've now concluded, and I'm not the only one. There's too many streaming services. These guys have got to figure this out because the simple fact is, I don't think we're going to ever see people paying $100 a month. Or plus, I think now even, to secure every streaming service just so I can watch one show over here, one show over here, one show over here. This was always going to be the big question. How are you going to make this all work with streaming and stuff? And it feels to me now we're just getting too diluted a market, and it seems that every man and his dog not only is operating streaming services, but they also, Morden says Disney will own all of it eventually. Oh, scary. Not only is this like every man and his dog getting into streaming, but now every man and his dog seems to be getting into making their own content as well. So Apple TV, latest cab off the rank. And so I got into the Apple TV streaming service and had a look because we got it free. And lo and behold, there's 8 or 9 things, I think, in total. That's it. That's all they've got to offer. My first thought was, wow, if you were dedicated to sitting down and watching this, you could watch the entire service, everything they've got on there. You could probably watch it in 2 weeks. like there's not much there, which is kind of interesting that they launched so quickly without much more else on board than what they've got. There were a couple of interesting things that I thought, this could pique my interest. I haven't watched the M. Night Shyamalan TV series that's there yet. I'm going to probably have a look at that next. But I watched For All Mankind. Obviously, Ronald Moore's involved. I loved Battlestar Galactica, the TV series. I thought it was great. And the premise is fascinating. It's a really good premise. Those who don't know, For All Mankind is... CJM says, who is paying for streaming services when you can sail the high seas? I wonder what he means. I'm so innocent about these things. So For All Mankind, this is a great premise that you've got. And for those who don't know about the show, For All Mankind, the premise is this. It's an alternate history. Kind of like The Man in the High Castle, except they've sort of ruined the original Philip K. Dick short story. But The Man in the High Castle, what if Hitler had won the war? There's others too, like Fatherland was another one. What if Hitler had won the war? And so in this case, it's what if the space race was still going on because the Russians had got to the moon first. They'd put a man on the moon first. And that is an interesting premise. There's so much you could explore around what the implications of that might mean. And the first episode starts with great promise, but then it very quickly pivots into getting females into space. It becomes, all of a sudden, it just gets dominated by the progressive politics of today, and in a way that just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me at all. There's several episodes they obsess over this question of the female space race. So basically what you've got is the show with a really interesting premise, and then what they do is quickly pivot to what they actually want to talk about, which was a show about females in the space race. That's what they really wanted to make the show about. And so you get this hackneyed sort of half-pie pivot to get into that. They have what they do is the Russians put a female cosmonaut on the moon before the Americans, and then this TV show tries to get you to believe that the Americans would be so upset and offended by this that they would then immediately launch their own female space program just so they could then put females on the moon as well. And it just, to me, that doesn't make sense, because if you know anything about the history of the time, that wouldn't have been, like, something like that would make sense if both parties were trying to be the first to do a thing. Like, the first to get to the moon makes sense. The first to put females on the moon was not a thing that the Americans were trying to do at the time, so it's not like they would be particularly baited by that and go, oh no, we've got to do this as well. And then from there, it's sort of, there's some weird stuff that happens. That there's one episode that, look, this is the thing. There's still good writing in there. That's what's frustrating, along with the nonsense. There's a couple of episodes where he does this sort of contrast between two groups of people trapped in places. I'll say spoiler alert, trapped in space, trapped in Earth in a small space. There's some interesting ways that these it's a bit deeper than your usual sort of hackney cheap writing in that way. But then you get these silly things like they decide that they're gonna mine ice off the moon. And so they're in the middle of a mission. They are literally not far away from landing on a predetermined landing site. This mission that they're on was not supposed to have anything to do with mining on the moon or exploring, for ice. And they decide that they're actually going to do this. They're going to completely change their mission as they're about to land the lander on the moon and go to a brand new site they've never even scouted before. They're going to try and land there, and then they're going to go exploring. With no preparation, no trajectory calculations, no nothing. They're just going to do it on the fly. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I just can't buy this. At this point, I can't. I wouldn't call myself an uber space nerd, but I've watched and know enough about the space race and watched enough. I've got quite a few documentaries in my collection about it. That's just not how that works. And so there's things like that happen alongside the good stuff. And then there's weird stuff as well. So the latest episode I watched, they decided that they were going to include the Equal Rights Amendment, which failed. And they seem to completely ignore why the Equal Rights Amendment actually failed in America, an amendment to the Constitution that they tried. So you got a group of militant sort of third-wave feminists who are very much in the Marxist feminist view of the world. It's sort of males, females, and a power struggle. Then you had another group of females who actually formed a very effective, what you might call authentic feminist movement. They focused on the what you might call the feminine genius, and they really made a big deal of saying, hey, these militant revolutionaries over here are trying to say that all the good things about femininity are bad, like motherhood and having family and things like that. Somehow they're degraded and they're looked down upon. And this group said, no, that's not true, and we don't need this amendment. And they fought a really effective grassroots campaign across the US, and the amendment failed. Well, this show decides to change that history and inserts the equal rights. It actually becomes quite an important plot point in one of the episodes. They decide to insert that and just sort of completely ignore the real history. Now, I know it's an alternate history, but still, it's an alternate history that Jeremy Collins says we need more kids in space. It's an alternate history that takes place in the real world still. Like they're working with real events. So, for example, Ted Kennedy doesn't go off to Chappaquiddick, and Mary J. Kopechne is not killed in the back of his car, and so he becomes president. And so they're working with real events. And so, but what they've done is they've told this completely revisionist history of the real events as well as their alternate timeline, and that I find a bit frustrating. I do. And here's the thing: there's so much that's interesting about this. Werner von Braun, and his past, it comes out and it becomes a big point of scandal. And that kind of makes sense, because the reason it really didn't get as much coverage is because they were successful. But what if they weren't successful? All of a sudden people would start probing and looking at things like that. But then the way it happened didn't quite make sense to me either. But anyway, that's another story. So there's lots of interesting things you can tell in that premise. That is a really good premise. And yeah, C. James says, sounds like part of the show was written by science fiction fans and the other parts by SJWs. And I think that's it. So you definitely see Ronald Moore in his writing. You see that there. As I said, there's depth. It's not trash. It's definitely not trash. But it's kind of frustrating, as I said. What should have been an alternate and interesting history about the space race, very quickly they pivoted as fast as they could by the second episode into turning it into, what about if it was a female space race? And with very little justification for doing that. And then they became obsessed about that. And then now it's moving into other progressive political talking points as well. The thing I was thinking about as I was watching this was, you've got this revisionist history going on. But it reminded me the first time I realized that that Hollywood, whenever you see based on a true story, now this is a alternate history. So for those who just joined us, we're talking about For All Mankind, the TV series on Apple TV. It's an alternate vision of history. What if Russians had got to the moon first? And it's supposedly about the space race. Now, it takes real events that happen though and twists them. And so it got me thinking about the first time I realized, I was a young man, I think I was about 19 at the time, about how whenever you see based on a true story on a film, you can't trust it. Basically, you've got to wipe that sentence from your mind. Whenever you see based on a true story, what you've got to do is go and do your research and make sure that this film has told you, or this TV series is actually telling you the truth about those events. And the first time I realized how disingenuous Hollywood could be, and I'm not talking about poetic license, because you always have poetic license in stories, where you have true stories where they can't effectively tell the story in a short space of time. So they might leave out events, or they might condense 2 or 3 important characters down into one character who represents those 2 or 3 or more real characters. You know, things like that. That's what you call poetic license, but you keep the substance of the story the same. But the first time I realized where Hollywood had a propensity just to tell outright lies and then stick, you know, based on a true story or the true story of on the front of something that was just bollocks, was when I went to see Murder in the First. I don't know if any of you remember the film Murder in the First, or you've seen it. The film itself wasn't bad. It was back in the sort of, I guess you might say the golden era when we was telling stories. And the story's pretty engaging. And let me give you the synopsis. So basically what you've got is it's a 1995 American legal drama about a petty young criminal named Henry Young, who was played by Kevin Bacon, and who's put on trial for murder in the first degree. And it also stars Christian Slater and Gary Oldman. And the film itself, as far as stories goes, it's not bad. Here's the plot, though. Let me give you the plot of the film. I'm going to read it off the Wikipedia site. As a 17-year-old orphan, Henry Young steals $5 from a grocery store to feed himself and his little sister, both of whom are destitute. So he's doing this thing out of desperation. He's not some psychopathic career criminal or anything like that. He is apprehended by the store clerk, and his younger sister is sent to an orphanage. Because that grocery store also housed a US post office, his crime becomes a federal offence. Young never sees his sister again and is sentenced to Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas. After being transferred to Alcatraz, he participates in an escape attempt with 2 other prisoners. The escape plan fails due to the betrayal of a fellow inmate. Young is punished by being sent to the hole, quote unquote, obviously solitary, which is in Alcatraz's dungeons. Except for 30 minutes on Christmas Day 1940, he is left there for 3 years. The solitary confinement causes Young to lose his sanity. On release back to the general population, he experiences a psychotic episode in the prison cafeteria and attacks McCain, stabbing him to death with a spoon in full view of the prison staff and the other convicts. Young is put on trial in San Francisco for first-degree murder, and what prosecutors and the public defender's office believe is an open and shut case. Public defender James Stampill, played by Christian Slater, a recent graduate of Harvard Law School, was given the case, the ominous case, and after discovering the facts of Young's case, Stampill attempts to put Alcatraz on trial by alleging that its harsh conditions drove him insane. The trial becomes highly politicised and contentious. Eventually, Young is convicted of involuntary manslaughter, not first-degree murder. He is returned to Alcatraz, where he subsequently dies. The film concludes with The Rock's associate warden Milton Glenn being convicted for mistreatment and banned from working in the US penal system. Now, that's the film. That's the story you get in the film, with "this is the true story of" plastered all over it at the beginning of the film. And I was like, man, why have I never heard of this injustice before? So I leave the film, young, fresh-faced 19-year-old, and I go and do some research to find out more about this story. And what do I discover? This is what I actually discover, and let me read you the actual historical reality. The film makes numerous changes to historical events. Remember what I've just read to you. That's the story we got in the film. The real Henry Young was not convicted of stealing $5 to save his sister from destitution. You're like, oh, okay, maybe he stole $10. Here's the real story. He had been a hardened bank robber and taken a hostage on at least one occasion and had committed murder in 1933. Oh, so that's very different to a young child who stole $5 to feed his destitute sister. Young was also no stranger to the penal system. Before being incarcerated at Alcatraz in 1936, he had already served time in 2 state prisons in Montana and Washington. In 1935, he spent his first year in federal correctional facilities at McNeil Island, Washington, before being transferred to Alcatraz. The film ends with the fictional Henry Young being returned to the dungeons of Alcatraz in the early 1940s, where he supposedly dies. Wait for it. In reality, this is classic, the real Young remained on Alcatraz until 1948, before he was moved to the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners at Springfield, Missouri, where he stayed until 1954. While on Alcatraz he remained in the cell block, Young was not kept in any dungeon as they had been closed almost a decade earlier. In 1954, Young was transferred to the Washington State Penitentiary at Walla Walla to begin a life sentence for the murder conviction in 1933. In 1972, Young was released from Washington State Penitentiary at the age of 61. He jumped parole. According to the Washington State authorities, his whereabouts remain unknown. But it's almost certain he's dead now. That's the real story. That is like completely different. And I remember reading that, and it was like, honestly, it was the first time I'd realized that Hollywood true stories were often just garbage. And it was such an eye-opener for me. And I remember at the time, it was like someone had plunged a dagger into my 19-year-old optimistic view of the world, you know? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just blatant falsehood. This is nothing like the real story. So, yeah, that Hollywood, man. How did I get talking about that? That's right. So the moral of the story is that whenever you see true story in a Hollywood production, you basically need to absolutely check your facts. And unfortunately, this Apple TV series For All Mankind has sort of got elements of that in it. The bigger question, I guess, is how will streaming services survive? Will they survive? Because as I said, I don't think people are going to pay $100 a month to get multiple streaming services. Quick HBO update, moving on to HBO. The Outsider. Has everyone seen or heard about The Outsider? Have you been watching The Outsider TV series? Because I have, and I'm really enjoying it. It's actually a television show that is really, really well put together, well told story, being released week by week, which I think is great, by the way. The return of weekly release episodes is good for a couple of reasons. I remember reading a study a few years ago which talked about how binge watching a television show is a very unsatisfying experience for people when they survey people about it. And I think it makes sense. I think you go on a bit of a high, a bit of a dopamine high, where you get to the end of an episode and it's like, oh, what's coming next? And you get a little teaser, and you get into the next episode and it's like, oh, what's coming next? Whereas releasing an episode each week, I think there's something about that. I quite like it. Anyway, as frustrating it is because you can't watch the whole thing when you want to watch it. But that's not a bad thing. That's delayed gratification. But the Outsider TV series is good. I'm enjoying it. Morden Gray says, I'm going to direct a true story one day. Martin Luther King Jr. the movie starring George Clooney as Martin Luther King Jr. Oh, I'm just waiting. There's going to be movies coming about Martin Luther King, I'm sure of it, now that they've got this new scholarship showing. Obviously his marital infidelity, his adultery, is now sort of largely a lot more known about and admitted to than it was previously. But there's that new scholarship, and was it FBI recordings when they were recording him that indicates that he was in a room where a young woman was raped. So it'll be interesting to see now. I read an article featuring one of the top Martin Luther King Jr. scholars, who is a scholar of the man and like academic and absolutely loves the guy. And he was saying to his dismay that he believes that the tapes are legit. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out in modern cinema soon. Anyway, so I'm watching The Outsider, the TV series, Jason Bateman. It's good. Ben Mendelsohn plays the police officer. Ben Mendelsohn is a great Australian actor, director Krennic. And I remember watching Mendelsohn in smaller films before he made his big break in Hollywood, and you're like, yeah, this guy, man, he's got real talent. He really has. And yet again in this series, it's a really good TV series, a good slow burn murder mystery with a supernatural element. But the way it plays out is really good. And there's a fascinating character. I can't remember. Let me see if I can Google up her name. Let me go to the old Google machine here and Google in the TV series The Outsider. Here we go. And let's see if I can figure out who this actress's name is. But there's what I love about it is that the characters and the character struggles and things that go on. But here we go. Who is it? The actress. Where is she? Cynthia Erivo, yeah, who plays, it's Holly Gibney, isn't it? Yeah, Holly Gibney, such a fascinating character. And she's sort of, she's this autistic person. Well, she's certainly on the spectrum, and she's a private investigator, and man, her character is great. I just love her character, and there's some great, well-written moments with her character. So I don't know if you've seen it or not. Yeah, Bloodline. Bloodline was another one that he was in. Yeah, that's John Lyons. That's definitely Ben Mendelsohn, and he is a great actor. He's a really good actor. Stefan says, have you seen Breaking Bad? Yes, I have. And Breaking Bad is a great exploration, I think, of masculinity. It's really about dysfunctional masculinity and a man who can't let go of something. That's really where the series concludes. He can't love what he should love, and he loves the wrong things. His own obsessive desire for power and fame and everything else. It's so well told, that story, and the way it's told is just phenomenal. Media Maniac says, watching Breaking Bad right now with my dad. One thing I really appreciated about Breaking Bad was the fact that it wasn't like your typical sort of TV series. A lot of series in that era, there was a lot of porno content in it, and so it was hard to, I quit series because of that. I'm just not interested in it. And you couldn't really share it with people, and it wasn't like you sit down with your parents and watch it and things like that. Well, Breaking Bad was, there's just that stuff. There's one or two scenes, they're very tame, and it's all at service of the story. It's not for gratuity's sake. It was a really well told story, really tightly told story. Yeah, Morden, I'm about to talk about Luke Skywalker soon, actually. But yeah, anyway, so if you're not watching The Outsider, you should. The other HBO-related news, of course, is the fact that apparently there's not going to be any Season 2 of The Watchmen. Wow, colour me surprised. They're not going to make a second or third or even fourth or fifth or sixth season of that spectacular television show that everyone was raving about and was so faithful to the original source material and made absolute sense and absolutely did not feature a Mary Sue in the main character role. No, why would they? Why? How could they? I can't believe this. I'm shocked, I tell you. I'm shocked, I tell you. Shocked. No, I am not surprised at all. Because quite frankly, season 1 was just, there's glimmers of promise in that season, but what a mess. Is it Julio from Mexico? Is it Julio or... I'm sorry, I'm terrible. I'm a Kiwi. I'm from New Zealand. So I'm pretty sure that I pronounced your first name Julio. But anyway, g'day Julio. And hopefully I'm pronouncing... Yes, I got it right. Awesome. Man, from Mexico. What part of Mexico are you in, Julio? So anyway, no Watchmen while we're waiting for Julio. We're talking about Watchmen Season 2. There's not going to be any Season 2 apparently. And as I said, I'm not surprised and I don't really care. Does anybody else care about that? I don't think anybody does because it was terrible, man. Angela Abar as a character, the way she's written, it was a Mary Sue, Mexico City. Oh, you live in Berlin. Oh, classic. Good old Germany. I wouldn't mind going to Germany. My wife lived in Italy for a year before we met. She lived there and taught English, and so we're talking about the possibility of getting back to that part of the world at some point soon. There's parts of Europe I'd like to see, in Germany, and Berlin in particular, somewhere I'd like to see. So I'm not surprised. There's no Watchmen Season 2, and quite frankly, I'm not too bothered about that either. I doubt anybody here is. Jose says, big blue cosplayer. It was so bizarre, wasn't it? It was the eyes that were weird. It was so weird. It was just weird. And here's the big problem with The Watchmen, the new version. They tried to make race the central sort of thing, and it doesn't work. I think The Watchmen was like really lightning in a bottle. The comic book series worked because it was in the era of nuclear proliferation and the threat of global nuclear war. And people, I remember as a kid, I grew up with that and we were freaked out about that. So Watchmen worked in that context and drawing on that fear, it worked. to take that story that works on a global crisis level and then to try and apply it to racial tensions, it just doesn't work. And yeah, they showed that it just doesn't work. Victor says no stream ? Don't cross the streams, Victor. No, are you saying you can't see me, or anyway? So sorry, just no stream. Oh, my sister. Oh, there you go. Teaching English. Yeah, my wife has a degree. She's an honours degree in linguistics and Italian translation. For Ben. Anyway, I don't speak much Italian. My wife has a funny story, actually. She went to Catholic girls' school, and she got up after she came back from Italy and was told to sort of give a report to some of the students about her time in Italy and what it was like living there and stuff, the old high school she went to. And she got up and she was dared to by someone else to say a couple of naughty words in Italian, and she did. The teachers, oh, so great. Lovely. Not realising it was my wife. Anyway, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. No, before we talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Obi Wan Kenobi. Why, hello there. It's on indefinite hold. The TV series is on indefinite hold. The Obi Wan Kenobi TV series. Remember the much lauded, this is coming, it's going to be amazing. It's on indefinite hold. Anakin, you were my brother. I just don't get this. There was so much hype and they were pumping this show that's coming out, and then bang, it's on indefinite hold. We hear apparently there's a problem with the scripts, even though I've seen the footage of Kathleen Kennedy, was it last year at one of the conventions, saying the scripts are all done and it's amazing, and now in actual fact she's saying no, they're not. So I don't know which one was true, back then or now. Apparently people have suggested that that it was too similar to The Mandalorian, the storyline. I'm thinking, how could that happen? Is no one communicating at Star Wars and then at Disney Star Wars? I was like, yeah, that probably does make sense then. But even then, it's like, how could you have similarities to The Mandalorian that were that great? Honestly, how? Like, think about Obi Wan Kenobi. He's not a bounty hunter. What, they're going to have him looking after a baby alien or something, man? I don't know. Like, it seems weird that it suddenly took them this long to figure that out, and it sort of really got me thinking, how the heck? And Morton Gray says, Kennedy having a difference of opinion with writers and directors. I can't believe it. I'm shocked, I tell you, shocked. The Deems, they're in the workforce now. What's going on with the world? I'm shocked. Yeah, no, I'm not shocked. How does Kathleen Kennedy still have a job? How does she still have a job with this going on? It's not just one film. It's multiple projects now where you're getting people fired at the last minute, a complete rewrites. The trilogy was a mess. I don't. How does she still have a job? Now, I saw an article the other day. I was tweet someone and said, "Does she have dirt on everyone in Hollywood? You know, does she know where the bodies are buried? Is there some dirt she's got on all these big players that keeps her in a job?" I don't know. I think it's probably a little bit simpler than that. I think two things are happening here. One is, in a big corporation, you often get this. The rot just sets in, but no one, unless you've got really strong visionary leadership that's willing to make the hard calls, no one makes the big decisions. And people very high up, literally, I guess the Michael Scotts of this world, Michael Scott from The Office, they are able to survive in places where they shouldn't be able to survive for very long periods of time. My wife worked at a university, I won't say which one, but she worked for a university and in a administrative role. And she used to tell me stories when we were first married about this boss that she had. Their team had it. It is quite high up. They brought him from overseas to come and work in the university. And the stories she used to tell me were unbelievable. It was literally like plots from The Office. It was like Michael Scott was their boss. It was astounding. And he was able to survive for a very long time in that job, for a very long time. How's this for a classic? He went to I think it was a management conference or some sort of leadership conference overseas, went to a workshop that had a very bizarre title. We might say Mermaids and Unicorns, and it was supposed to be about leadership. all they had was the title and some very brief intro to what was going to be covered, but didn't talk about what was actually going to be covered. Mermaids and unicorns. They turned up, her boss turned up to this workshop. The lecturer didn't show. So they didn't actually get to hear what was meant by mermaids and unicorns. But he came back to his place of work, where he's the manager, and he told his staff about this. And then he told them that him and a couple of others had sat down and thought what they thought it might actually mean, and they were going to decide they were going to try and implement it at a university. It's like, what? What? So you sat down and you just assumed something and made something, and you thought, let's try and implement this. Like, what is this craziness? And that was just a mild version of his behaviour. But people can survive very high up in corporations like that for a long time without any accountability. So I think that's part of the thing here. It's, you know, that's a factor. Secondly, we're living in a sort of the current ideological current is such where they're so desperate to have females in boardrooms and females in senior management positions, and having Kathleen Kennedy in a role like that was sort of touted as this big thing. I think there's probably a little bit of a fear of, well, how do we sack her now? Because we don't want to be accused, and they will be, and they know, they move in those circles. They know that the wokerati will come after them. And they will accuse them of firing her. That they will say that these people have fired her because she's a woman. So I suspect that's a factor as well. So I think those two things are working in concert to create an absolute disaster. But yeah, I can't believe this. Obi Wan Kenobi on hold. I've got to be honest with you, I wasn't particularly thrilled for the Obi Wan Kenobi TV series. I don't look at it and go, wow, an Obi Wan Kenobi spin-off, that's going to be amazing. I mean, it might have been really good, who knows. But the news of it didn't thrill me in a major way. But I'm just surprised that they've got this far down the track and all of a sudden, boom, it's on indefinite hold. I wouldn't be surprised if we discover in actual fact it's been cancelled altogether, that they pulled the pin. And I don't know, I wonder, like there was talk last week about Ewan McGregor being unhappy with some of the conditions or something. Now this could all be pure speculation and rumour mongering, so we don't know. But possibly what's happening is maybe he's looking at the situation and going, it's not a good time to be attached to Disney Star Wars, and there's some fights have erupted and they're trying to get out of it. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, what a mess. What a mess. But the question is, how does she still have a job? Okay, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Morgan Gray says, I'm just giving my opinion based on what I've heard her say from one month to the next. It's like she has no memory. Yeah. I think it is. I think it's like Michael Scott syndrome, where you just say stuff. It sounds like management speak. It sounds like the right thing to say. But yeah, how does she still have a job? By the way, I just noticed my high forehead. So every now and then I notice it. I was reading or watching something the other day about apparently in Korea they have a prejudice. I don't know. Are there any Koreans here watching? I must ask my friend Don, who's a Korean, whether this is true. But apparently, big forehead in Korea, small forehead. So yeah, I need to start streaming in Korea. Okay, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. What do I think? Someone says to me, like a demented robot. Yeah, I'm assuming that you're not talking about me. But yeah, maybe. Okay, who are you calling a robot? Okay, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. What did I think? I finally got to watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Remember, I talked about this before Christmas here. I was looking forward to this film. A lot of hype. I wanted to see it. And I have to say, I was disappointed. It's not a bad film. Don't get me wrong. It is not a bad film. There's moments of Tarantino greatness. His real strength, I think, is dialogue. It's still his strength. Tarantino's real gift is dialogue. He writes dialogue that you just, you can hang off every word, sort of thing. And there's moments of that. There's moments of Tarantino greatness in the dialogue in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think of, even though I think it was a bit unfair to Bruce Lee, and apparently his family are not happy about it at all, that monologue with what is supposed to be Bruce Lee talking about the Muhammad Ali fight and boxing, and that was just classic Tarantino. Pure Tarantino. The dialogue, the scene with the I can't remember, I don't know what the character's name was, in the back of the car towards the end of the film, Charles Manson's ladies, and she has that whole dialogue about the piggies. And I just, again, Tarantino. There's some, the shot selections are all good, and he's a professional filmmaker, so he's really good at that side of things. So, and the technical side of it, the aspect's very good. There's some great eye candy. They're driving down that street, and you really are captivated by all of the fact you realise this is all on camera. They've shot an entire street in period, which is pretty awesome. That stuff was good, and technically it's very proficient. And there's no doubt there's some sort of interesting commentary that's being grasped at here around the golden age of Hollywood and Hollywood naivety and all those kind of things. And what the Manson killings, were the Manson killings really though, Suki is or Suki, I'm not sure. Suki says, R.I.P. Kobe Bryant, we love you. Yeah, that's true. I should have started by saying that. R.I.P. Kobe and his daughter and the other people on that chopper. It's too early to speculate, isn't it? But it does sound like the pilot made a bad decision, and sadly a lot of people have died as a result. One thing I wanted to talk about in relation to that, and you've reminded me of this, was the fact that those ghoulish people who jumped on Twitter yesterday, and the first thing they did was brought up rape allegations. I thought that was just horrific, man. The guy has literally just died, and that's the first thing you think to do, or that this is what we've got to focus on. It's like, I'm not saying you whitewash people, but there's a time and a place, and I think basic human dignity, we should have respect, even in situations where there might be things hanging around. What you do is you have respect for the dead. It was so ghoulish. It was like, to see that as an opportunity, that's so weird to me, eh? Like, this is an opportunity to push my political wheelbarrow. And in just the same way, I think anyone who goes the other way and wants to sort of deify, we tend to get this as well. People deify celebrities and turn them into saints when they're not, when they die. And there's sort of the other extreme, you don't want to buy into that as well. But there's I couldn't believe that. Thank you for the super chat, Suki. Appreciate that a lot. Anyway, so Tarantino dialogue, greatness, the eye candy, technically very proficient, and interesting commentary. I don't know if it's 100% correct, though, as some are suggesting, to say that Charles Manson was the thing that destroyed Hollywood naivety and brought an end to that sort of golden era and changed the game. Look, it's one factor of many, I think, that plays into that history, but I don't know if it's all on that. But there's interesting commentary there, right? It's a film with a bit more going for it. However, what I found frustrating, two things. For me, one was the extreme graphic violence at the end, and it was extreme. I'd imagine even Nicholas winding Rent was probably was thrown up a little bit in his mouth. And if you know his films, you know what I'm talking about. Like it was Lars von Trier is like, oh, this is a bit heavy-handed, isn't it, Tarantino? That violence at the end, to me, I think that I was trying to recall afterwards, and I think that's the most graphic I've ever seen from Tarantino. And to me, it just felt gratuitous. It really felt so gratuitous. Like, you can still have that scene and everything else that plays out there, but without the graphic, it was pretty... to me, that just really stuck out as sort of weirdly out of place. The other thing, too, that was interesting was that as an overall package, I just felt that as an overall story, despite the brilliance that's there and these great acting performances and everything else, the overall story for me just wasn't particularly satisfying. And funnily enough, I contrast this with Hateful Eight. I watched The Hateful Eight, again, expecting a lot from it, and I'm a fan of Westerns. I was disappointed with The Hateful Eight. If I compare these two, I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was better than The Hateful Eight. But man, I was really disappointed with The Hateful Eight as well. Because there's other Tarantino films, and they're phenomenal as far as filmmaking goes. And I don't know whether you'd say Django or Inglourious. I think for me, Inglourious and Christoph Waltz, as funnily enough as in both of those films, but that opening sequence with Christoph Waltz in Inglourious is just something else, man. It is, if they're not, I hope they start teaching it in film school soon. Just phenomenal. Man, what the tension in that and it's phenomenal. So, but anyway, as an overall story for me, it just, I didn't really. I'm going to go back and give it another shot, as I often do with films, and watch it and see whether maybe I'm just, it's too much hype. I don't know. Media Maniac says, I hated The Hateful Eight. I love Quentin Tarantino films in general, but Django has its moments, but was a bit too extreme. Yeah, and again, I think it's interesting, like, at times you do see that weakness and that vulnerability there, I think, of Tarantino, is to use the graphic violence in a gratuitous way to try and, I don't know, to shock. I contrast this with Mel Gibson. When Mel Gibson makes his films, and he's got films with very violent imagery in them, but he uses them, that they're at service of something else in his films. The Passion of the Christ, Apocalypto, what was the latest one about Private Desmond Doss? I can't remember the name of it now. The war one that he released 2 years ago. Can't even remember the name. It slips my mind. Jeremy says, have you seen I have seen Lighthouse. No, I haven't. I've heard it's good. I haven't seen that yet either. So there's three I want to see. Hacksaw Ridge. Thank you very much, Stefan. It is Hacksaw Ridge. Very good film about freedom of conscience and why freedom of conscience is so important. I haven't seen 1917. That's what I want to see. I haven't seen Parasite, and I haven't seen Lighthouse. The three that I actually want to see, I've heard that are quite good. And I think what I'm going to do is just give myself a bit of time, maybe get away from the hype. Maybe part of the problem with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was all the hype. You hype it up in your mind too much. Okay, my brother is over from Canada at the moment with his wife and kids, just here for a month, and so we're going to go and see 1917 in the next week or so, so I'll be able to let you know what I think. The Doomsday Clock article, let me read you this Doomsday Clock article. This is just classic. I stumbled across this the other day, this news, January the 24th. Scientists say we are closer to Doomsday than ever before, so like I said, you better start panicking, people. The keepers of the Doomsday Clock on Thursday moved the symbolic countdown to global disaster to the closest point to midnight in its 73-year history, citing existential danger from nuclear war and climate change. Even though the Doomsday Clock was supposed to be about nuclear war, but now it's just adding anything in there. Amp up the catastrophe stakes, I guess. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which was founded after the creation of the atomic bomb in World War II and focuses on the greatest threats to human survival, said it moved the clock from 2 minutes to midnight to 100 seconds to midnight, a 20-second advanced. And I can imagine people reading this article going, oh my gosh, the scientists are telling us we're going to die. And then you stop and think about it and you're like, what? This is just so arbitrary. Listen to this. The decision was made by the group's Science and Security Board in consultation with its board of sponsors, which includes 13 Nobel laureates. In a statement accompanying the clock's advance, the organisation said the nuclear and climate dangers are compounded by a threat multiplier, cyber-enabled information warfare that undercuts society's ability to respond. The international security situation is dire, not just because these threats exist, but because world leaders have allowed the international political infrastructure for managing them to erode. So this is about your frustration, probably about things like Brexit and the declining state of the UN and countries sort of doing their own thing. That sounds like that's what's really going on. Rachel Bronson, president and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, said, "We are now expressing how close the world is to catastrophe in seconds." Well, it's always been in seconds, what's a minute? 60 seconds? What's 2 minutes? 120 seconds? So on and so on. How close the world is to catastrophe in seconds, not hours or even minutes. We now face a true emergency. Didn't face one last year, but we do this year. An absolutely unacceptable state of world affairs that has eliminated any margin for error or further delay, she said. Former California Governor Jerry Brown, the Bulletin's executive chairman, warned that dangerous rivalry and hostility among the superpowers increases the likelihood of nuclear blunder. Really? I don't know, actually. I've got to be frank with you. It's like I grew up under the threat of nuclear blunder, and it was a lot worse than what it is now. Climate change just compounds the crisis, he said. If there's ever a time to wake up, it's now. The Doomsday Clock didn't move in 2019, but in 2018 it advanced by 30 seconds from 2.5 minutes before midnight. I imagine Megadeth would have been quite frustrated about that. Hands up if you get that reference. Before midnight to 2 minutes to midnight. Oh no, they would have been satisfied with that. So they went from 2.5 minutes before midnight to 2 minutes to midnight. There's your Megadeth reference. Okay. Now here's the thing. This is, I'll come back to the final paragraph in just a second, because this is the stuff that I was like, what the heck is going on here? First of all, people reading this could be very easily duped into thinking there's some objective measure for the apocalypse and they've figured it out. This is just totally arbitrary. It's like, how did you... Well, we sat around as a small group of people, looked at world affairs and said, we think there's going to be an apocalypse. We're closest to apocalypse than we've ever been in history before. And you're like, what? This is just arbitrary. There's nothing objective about it. This is no scientific measure. We measured the circumference of the sun. We used the age-old method of testing for an apocalypse. We measured the circumference of the sun. We times it by the radiant heat of Mars. Like this. There's nothing objective about this. This is just astounding to me. And the media is touting, it's apocalypse is coming. Literally in my country, the media just 2 days ago, after this article, is a good old-fashioned follow-up. They had a whole series of doomsday preppers in New Zealand who were talking, in light of the fact that the Doomsday Clock is now the closest it's been to the apocalypse ever, here's a whole lot of doomsday preppers talking about what they're doing to prepare for the end of the world. I'm like, oh, great. Nutty people. Anyway, but here's the thing that really caught my eye at the end of this article. As the symbolic clock was moved on Thursday, the Bulletin's experts were joined by former Irish President Mary Robinson, who now leads the Elders. Capital T, capital E, the Elders. A group of prominent former world leaders founded by Nelson Mandela and ex-UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, now Deputy Chairman of the Elders. Robinson called on world leaders to join in working to pull humanity back from the brink. Now, when I read that, I was like, the Elders? What the heck is the Elders? So I went and Googled and had a look, and yeah, sure enough, there's a group of... That's the first thing I thought. Morden says, the Elders, do they have the rings of power? I was like, are these guys trying to sound like every conspiracy theory is true? They're like, what should we name ourselves? Why don't we come up with a name that'll make everyone immediately think there is a conspiracy theory to control the world? I know. Why don't we call ourselves the Elders? Capital T, capital E. But then apparently it was partially formed by Nelson Mandela and Peter Gabriel, who's a great musician and who was good in Genesis, but, musicians are like celebrities when it comes to their expertise on world affairs. But anyway, this whole... I don't know, I found that whole thing hilarious. The Elders, man, what the heck? They really are trying to make people think the conspiracy theories are real. The Elders have spoken. The Elders have deemed it so. So it shall be written, so it shall be done. Okay, our last two topics before we close for the day. Let's talk about... I want to talk about Luke Skywalker at the end, but Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes... No, let's talk about Luke Skywalker first. So, I reckon I've discovered well, I'm not the only one, I'm sure, but a better Luke Skywalker than Luke Skywalker in the new Disney Star Wars. I finally got around to watching the brand new History Channel TV series Nightfall. Yes, Morden Gray, you were right. It was Nightfall. And Nightfall, which talks about the Knights Templar and a bit of the history around then. I mean, let's forgive their historical the questionable take on elements of history and certain prejudicial takes on things. But it's actually quite an enjoyable TV show. I was enjoying it. I thought, this is a good TV series. Nightfall. Now, Mark Hamill is in Nightfall, and he plays none other than Master Talos. Oh, someone said the elders like Cthulhu. Anyway, honestly, I would not be surprised to find out that the elders have their own army next, or police force or something. I would not be surprised. Anyway, okay, so Master Talos, this grizzled old knight from the Knights Templar, played by Mark Hamill, and he's this seasoned warrior, and he trains the young veterans who want to become Knights Templar. And you know what? I watched this series, this Nightfall TV show, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is what Luke Skywalker could have actually been. And even Rian Johnson, who wanted to do an older, more grizzled Skywalker, this is what he could have actually been. Like, it's unbelievable. It's kind of uncanny, actually, watching this and thinking, my gosh, this is exactly... If you haven't seen it, go and watch it, particularly season 2. And you realise, man, he's got this sort of hard edge, the cynical edge, but he's not cynical about the Templars and their history. He respects it. He's so committed to the history and to the importance of that history. That's why he's so hard on the new recruits. And he was a great warrior. There's some battles that he's involved in, and he actually proves that he's a great warrior. It's it was unbelievable. It's kind of uncanny, actually. And you think to yourself, man, this could have, instead of making him into a whiny sort of angsty blue milk drinking weirdo, he could have actually been this, and that would have fulfilled all of the aims that Rian Johnson was trying to go for, by the way, as well, because he wanted that sort of cynical older Luke who was in a different stage than what we'd seen him previously, and this would have fulfilled that without betraying and selling out the character, and it would have made sense. It would have made so much sense, because he would have had the hardened edge like Master Talos does in this show, because of Kylo Ren's betrayal and what had happened with his, he had lost his legacy and the Jedi school and all the rest of it. And so, and the whole thing about the Templars is you've got to pass these really stringent tests, and it's like special forces basically of the day, and they treat them in really harsh ways to try and see who will wash out and who will actually succeed and carry on. And that would have been perfect on Ahch-To with Rey, and this young girl arrives, and he's like, who is this young girl? And okay, you want to be a Jedi? Well, I'll show you what it means to be a Jedi. Like, that would have been, and combined with the fact that he was wounded and broken after the betrayal of Kylo Ren and everything else, it would have been just, honestly, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. Go and watch it, and I think you'll realise, my gosh, that's what Luke Skywalker could have been. Everything he could have been. Which is, I guess, frustrating. Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes. I'm sure everyone's caught up with his speech now at the Golden Globes. His comedic emceeing at the Golden Globes. And I notice apparently already they've announced their 2 hosts for next year. That was very quick. Very, very quickly. Yeah, Media Maniac says, poor Mark Hamill. Indeed, I think about Mark Hamill, where they've treated him with respect in this history television show and given him a character who's just chewing the scenery, as they say, and then you compare that to what he was served up by Disney. It's like, ugh, yeah, just ugh. Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes, and I'm sure everyone by now, I mean, this is a couple of weeks old now, but the emceeing that he did, and how he just didn't hold anything back from the celebrity elite, and especially the final comment he made, where he said, just, if you come up here, just thank your producer. Thank you, producer. Thank everyone for your award. Take your statue. Thank you, God, and then sit down. And your view of politics is it's just not that important. Well, what did several of them do? They got up and proved how right he was. And the most obvious one I think of all was when Michelle Williams got up and gave her speech, and it was just astounding. It was like the tone-deaf nature of how dysfunctional Hollywood culture now is. The weird, the weird bubble that they are living in Hollywood. This is not about, which politician do you like? This is about, if you haven't seen it, go and watch Michelle Williams' speech. She gets up, receives her Golden Globe statue, and she immediately starts talking about abortion and how pro-abortion choice that she is. And then she talks about and mentions her own abortion and about how if she wouldn't have been here today to receive the statue, and so she's grateful for abortion, but she refers to choice, reproductive choice, and her reproductive choice because it allowed her to be here today to have the statue. And you're thinking, what is wrong with you? Like, I know, I'm pro-life myself, but I know pro-choice people, even they were shocked by that. And they're like, she don't even realize what she's saying. She's saying, I would rather have aborted my child to get this meaningless little statuette that was worth more than one of my own children was. It's demented. It's just demented. There's no other way to put that. It's just demented. But that's the culture that these people are living in. And you see it now in big TV as well. It's the same thing in television culture. And that's why we see a lot of the stuff that we do that's written into things. But it really did prove Ricky Gervais's point. Like, it is so... I mean, how do you put that into words? It's astounding to me. To think that... And as someone else said, I saw in a commentary article, what do her other two children at home think about this? What do they think? What's their take on this? Our brother or sister was considered less important than the statue. So, am I less important than the statue too? It's just demented. And it's funny, that's what we've moved from, by the way, in the whole abortion debate. We have shifted. This is one of my specialties. Those who don't know, bioethics is my background. I speak a lot. In fact, I'm off to Australia on Friday to spend a week delivering lectures on these very issues. And I speak a lot on this issue and the ethics around abortion. And I come at it from what you would call a pro-life perspective. And what I've seen in the 15 years that I've been in this space, working in this space, is the shift that's happened. About 15 years ago, I would have discussions with people who were pro-choice, and they were pro-choice because they believed that abortion was a necessary evil, or a necessary tragedy, you might say. They didn't like it. They didn't want lots of it to be happening, but they had this idea that, you have to have it because otherwise something bad will happen if we don't have abortion as an option. Now, that's an argument I understand. I disagree with it, and there's really good reasoning in response to that, against that position, but I understand that position. I understand why someone would think that way. That makes sense to me. But we've shifted right away from that now. We've shifted to now abortion being openly celebrated and touted as, it's been touted as a good thing, that you should celebrate, you should shout your abortion, as the campaign said. Miley Cyrus last year with that big cake that she's licking, she sticks all over Instagram. Abortion rights, I think it had on the top of the cake. She's licking it and celebrating it. An author last year, Sophie, I can't remember her second name, so I won't say it, but it slips my mind, but she released a book last year. She's a Marxist feminist, released a book. She's been published in the New York Times, not some fringe person. And in an interview about her new book, she calls pregnancy gestational work, applies the Marxist view of the world to pregnancy even. It's horrible. And women should be free to go on strike from gestational work that they don't want to do. It's a very euphemistic way of putting it, isn't it? But anyway, she says, I think it's important that we defend abortion. You can go and Google the interview, where she says, we need to stop making out that abortion is a tragedy or a sad thing. It's a form of killing, that's what it is, and we need to defend it. It's a form of killing and we need to defend it as such. That's what she says. So I would say at least she's being logically consistent, unlike a lot of people who are pro-choice who don't acknowledge the truth of what's going on, who just use euphemism. She's actually being logically consistent. But that's what we've moved to now, this extreme. And that's sort of the thing that dominates that Hollywood subculture. It's become, it's not a necessary tragedy, it's a celebrated thing. It's the thing you celebrate. It's held up as the emancipation of women. And that really comes from the third wave feminists who had this very militant Marxist view of male-female relations, where it's a power struggle, and they believe that pregnancy was part of the patriarchy. because they say, well, men can get up and run away from a pregnancy anytime they want to. A dad can just get up and leave. And he can. He'd be a deadbeat dad for doing that. In my mind, he would have failed as a father and as a man if he did that. I think in most people's minds he would have. But he can be a deadbeat dad and get up and leave. But a woman can't do that while she's pregnant. And so they say this is an injustice here, and therefore abortion is a form of emancipation. It gives women their freedom to walk away from a pregnancy anytime they want. And we should celebrate it. And now it's being referred to as healthcare in very Orwellian terms. Well, if that's true, then that must mean that pregnancy is a disease. Didn't think that through, did they? No, they didn't. And it's absurd. But that's the sort of the dominant culture that now dominates Hollywood and so much of the entertainment media that we see, and that's why you see so much of the stuff now. I think gone are the days where I remember a Law and Order episode where on an episode they had an episode on abortion, on the issue was around abortion on Law and Order, and they actually fairly presented both sides of the argument, the debate, and I just about fell off my chair. They actually presented both sides fairly, because you don't see the pro-life ethic presented fairly normally. It's caricatured, and what you normally see is, oh, they're all a bunch of abortion clinic bombers and psychos, and they hate women, and they want them to give birth to babies, and they don't care about them, which is bollocks. But that doesn't stop Hollywood from writing the caricature. And so, gone are those days, though, where you have a Law and Order episode where you actually have both sides presented. That's gone now. It's all about propaganda. And so, yeah, Michelle Williams just got up and proved Ricky Gervais's point that these people are just living in this bizarre, and I would call it highly toxic, and it's demented. It's a culture of death, basically. Yeah. John Lyon says, who has the final right over a woman's body? Well, and I agree with you. Bodily rights are important. So therefore, unborn females must have complete autonomy over their bodies too, right? That's why I'm pro-life, because I don't think the bodily rights argument holds up. As soon as you start trying to apply it, what it's trying to say is that in the name of bodily rights, I can actually use my bodily autonomy to deliberately bring an end to the life of another innocent human being. You can't do that. You can use self-defense when you're under threat, and that might bring an end to a life, but that would be an unjust aggressor who's attacking you. But against another innocent human person, you can't say, well, my bodily rights can trump their right to life. And even after birth, you can't walk away from an infant. You can't say, well, I don't want to give my body to care for this infant, and all the sleeplessness and the demands of feeding it and clothing it and working extra hard to earn all this extra money to pay for this infant. Why should I use my body to do that? So you can't invoke the bodily rights argument there. In fact, if a man tries to invoke the bodily rights argument to run away from paying child support, the courts would not accept that. He couldn't say, well, I consented to sex, but I didn't consent to being a father, so I don't want to pay child support for this child of mine. The courts would say that's not how that works. So, but that's probably another debate for another day. But the point is that there's all of that complexity is gone out of it, and all of the Media Maniac says Stefan says the body inside the woman is not her own body. Yeah, that's right. So the baby inside the body is it's a human being. That's the science of it. You take all the religion out of the equation. You don't need religion to see that. And that's why when I present on this topic, I've presented late last year. I was asked to present at a university, and I present what you'd call just a human reason. So basically relying on the best available fetal science and human reason, no religious arguments at all, as to why I believe the pro-life ethic is the right and correct one. But you won't hear that, though. That's what I'm saying. In the Hollywood scene, that just doesn't even cross their mind. Because they're not in the situation where they're like, I'm pro-choice because it's a necessary tragedy. They're at the point where it's like, celebrate this thing. Celebrate it. It's just, it's bizarre. It's a bizarre subculture. Oh my gosh, did that actually happen? Someone says, or you could try and sell the baby on eBay if you're an illegal migrant in Germany. Did that actually happen? I hadn't heard that. Far out. Yeah. Man. Far out. Yeah, man. So, the state of evil in the world. That happened. Wow. Unbelievable. So it was their own child. They tried to sell it on eBay. There you go. This is what cultural relativism, man. There is such a thing as good, and there is such a thing as truth, and some practices don't conform to goodness and truth. Some do. Yeah, it's not just Anyway, another speech for another day. Okay, for €5,000, far out. But obviously they caught them, right? They must have caught them before the child was sold. Jeremy. Bit of gallows humor. He says, who pays for the shipping? Oh, Jeremy. I laughed. It's the Irishman in me. When you're oppressed by the crown for so long, what are you going to do? To be sure. So I'm assuming, though, that they were caught and arrested. Oh, eBay took the advertisement down. Oh, that's very good of eBay to take the advertisement down. I'm really, that's you're Irish too, Jeremy, mate. Against the famine and the crown. eBay took the advertisement down. I mean, what a humanitarian thing to do. Take the advertisement down. These people are heroes. It says a lot about corporations and the state of corporate culture and ethics, doesn't it? You can sell a child on eBay, and they'll take it down once the media starts noticing it. Meanwhile, in my country, here in New Zealand, there's a guy who's selling what he calls MAGA hats. Our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Despite what you see in the mainstream media, her popularity is not as strong over here because, there's a lot of show that goes on. She's very much probably like Justin Trudeau and a lot of those world leaders. Not much substance, a lot of vacuous stuff and broken promises and all the rest of it. But anyway, there's a guy who started making these caps that say, make Ardern go away, MAGA. And he's selling them on TradeMe, which is our version of eBay, and the media got up in arms about it. And it's funny, they don't know how to... Anyone who's not progressive, they just call alt-right now. So anyone who's not progressive is automatically... alt-right hat seller. It's like, what? And what the heck is an alt-right hat seller? Bizarre. Just bizarre. Yeah, okay, so let me see if I can find an English language article. I don't remember all the details. Jeremy says, do they have a buy now price? What can you bet on it? Man, what a mess. Funnily enough, though, people get all outraged about that. And it's shocking. It is a shocking thing to hear. But funnily enough, that the idea of selling children in human history is, sadly, is not. Yeah, has not been as uncommon as it should have been. Anyway, someone says here the police let the parents walk. Gave them a warning, I suppose, at least. We don't do that in this country. Man, what a mess. Next week, let's anybody want to have a chat? I'll open the floor. We can have a little chat. Welcome back, by the way. Happy New Year to everyone who missed the Happy New Year message before. If you want to support the channel, please, I really appreciate all the support I can get. Keep doing this. There's a PayPal link in the description below, and there's a Patreon as well. If you want to contact me at any point about anything, fire away the contact details. You can get hold of me on Twitter or watchthedaily@gmail.com. I think it is watchthedaily@gmail.com if you want to email me. Jeremy Collins says, make America suck less. So next week, Media Manic says, still wish I knew when Doomsday was. It's funny, I was thinking about this the other day, how really secular culture now does have its own sort of pseudo-spirituality and religion. And it's got everything. It's got an apocalypse. It's got sort of this weird pseudo-spirituality with the sort of environmentalism, the extreme environmentalism stuff that you often hear about. There's the whole ethical 10 Commandments. I wouldn't be surprised if I see people worshipping the recycling bins soon. It's quite funny how we've got to where we're at. But yeah, the apocalypse thing. CJam says R.I.P. Terry Jones. Yeah, Terry Jones, his passing. Monty Python, man. Monty Python. They were just great. And Terry Jones and other members I said Monty Python have said that he's the sort of the brains, the driving force behind some of their best stuff. Their worship garbage ready. My thoughts on the Gucci 2020 collection. Was that the one with these dudes wearing like little weird op shop? Those guys wearing weird op shop look like sort of maybe hayseed ladies' clothes and stuff. Is that the one you're talking about? If it is, yeah. Yeah, if we have a new Trinity Now: Science, Humanism and Nature. Yeah, if it is that Gucci 20 Mod M, if it is the one I've seen, that's it. Oh my gosh. There's some weird stuff. It reminds me of this little meme that I used to have in my meme collection that I would share with people all the time, and it was it's called Fashion. Look it up. And the other one that I used to share was the Ariel hipster with the Ariel from Little Mermaid with the glasses on, and it's you don't understand my art. It's like, this is just dumb. This is dumb. This is not fashion. This is this is like art's like that now as well. Look at this guy. This guy he's dumped a whole bucket load of rubbish on the floor. What a powerful statement about the post-Iraq geopolitical situation and man's search for longing. And it's like, oh, give me a break. It's a dude who dumped a bucket load of rubbish on the floor. It ain't art. Sorry, I just turned on my printer. 1920s for the win. One thing I'd interested to hear your views on is what do people think about the people? I've heard people predicting in the last couple of weeks that they think 2020 is going to be the year that you see the death of woke culture. That this is the year it's all going to come to an end. I'm not as convinced. I think there's probably a bit more water to go into that bridge yet, and you see who's invested in it and how much is invested in it. I'd say that they'll fight like tooth and nail. I don't think. I'm not sure they're just going to suddenly move on from it like it was a trend. I suspect what you might see though is more people pushing back, but I don't think it's going to die. I really don't. And I'm not convinced Hollywood's going to learn. I mean, Michelle Williams, go and watch her speech and listen to everyone in that room clapping away. Yay, it's amazing. I don't think they're going to suddenly go, oh, yeah, maybe this isn't so right after all. That's not really how human intellectual conversion or any sort of conversion in a human being works. Think about your own life where you might have changed your view on an issue. It doesn't happen instantaneously, and it certainly doesn't happen by you being confronted by the cold hard reality. Normally what happens is the process takes time, and you come around to the idea gradually. So I'm not convinced that it's just going to suddenly disappear like some are saying. I think that's extremely hopeful, but I don't think that it's actually going to happen. I think woke culture, unfortunately, is with us for a while yet. And I think probably so is cancel culture. And I was thinking about this last night, actually. What was it? Why was I thinking about cancel culture? Oh, yeah, Iron Maiden, Seventh Son, which the progressive metal album by Iron Maiden, Seventh Son, is based on the Orson Scott Card novel of the same name, Seventh Son. Now, Orson Scott Card. Now, this is hilarious how I got to this train of thought. Orson Scott Card is the novelist who is famous for Ender's Game. Ender's Game was his sort of really big hit. But Seventh Son is sort of, a lot of people have forgotten about, but it was a fantasy novel that he wrote. And I guess his stab at Lord of the Rings. But Orson Scott Card was probably one of the first attempted sort of cancel culture moments, really, when you think about it. Was remember when there was huge uproar from the woke crowd because he dared to express his belief that marriage was between one man and one woman, and that he didn't believe that gay marriage could be anything other than just purely a legal construct. And he thought that it's the biological reality of having children that gives rise to marriage. This is not that controversial a view. But they came after him in a big way. He's not a Christian. I don't think he's, as far as I'm aware, he's not a Christian. He doesn't have any religious beliefs. But when Ender's Game, the movie, was coming out, they came after him big time over that. Oh, several years ago, he said these things that we disagree with. And so, yeah, he was one of the first. Anyway, it's funny how I got to that train of thought from Iron Maiden to cancel culture. But I don't think we've seen the end of it. I think what we'll see is, I think that they'll probably, particularly close to the 2020 election that's coming up. Already in my country, we've got an election here this year in New Zealand as well. And our Prime Minister came out the other day and said that, that we want a truthful campaign, and we're not these falsehoods and the social media lies that have infected the, electioneering overseas. And I remember thinking to myself, what? You guys have been using euphemism and telling outright porky pies for a while now. But yeah, I think that in an election cycle you tend to amplify these things, and so I'd say there'll be more of it. I think you'll see more. I see cancel culture will be on the rise. I think there'll be more nuttiness. I don't think it's going to... I just don't think 2020 is going to be the year of where cancel culture, where woke culture dies. I really don't. Jeremy says, what are your thoughts on Culture Club? Come a chameleon. Mate, you can't beat a bit of... It cracks me up. Culture Club, man, when I was a kid, yeah, Culture Club, primo, man. It was so funny. But how Boy George became a drug dealer, that just cracks me up. He got busted for it. It's just like, what? Just this, yeah, it's so bizarre. Anyway, it just seems so so contrary to what I would have imagined him doing with his life. Becoming a drug dealer out of a London flat, I think, wasn't it? Also quite toxic, bat soup. Not as bad as fugu, though. Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because do we know what the cause of the coronavirus? We know it's come via, isn't it? Snake via way of a snake? No, snake or bat via way of a snake. I remember once having a conversation with someone about the AIDS epidemic, and they were under the mistaken impression that it was sex with monkeys that had caused HIV/AIDS. No, that's not how that happened, as far as we're aware. Yeah, Jeremy says coronavirus, we're all going to die, and that's the other thing I didn't talk about today, but I saw here in New Zealand the newspaper coverage of this thing is. Deadly virus, there, death, there, mayhem, it's worse than we thought. And I've got to say, I've been a little bit disappointed with some people, even on YouTube, who have already, man, it's honestly, has anyone seen, was it Soderbergh who did Contagion? With Matt Damon? I enjoyed Contagion, and Gwyneth Paltrow. It's kind of ironic. Gwyneth Paltrow eating some weird, unscientific thing. And then she dies and infects the whole world with diseases. Yeah, Contagion. And the whole thing about how, was it Jude Law? That's right. Jude Law plays that blogger who's the conspiracy theorist. And then he's trying to sell people hazmat suits and things, wasn't he? I think he's trying to sell people cure. No, he's trying to sell them the cure. Remember that? Well, I watched a video yesterday from some guy who's actually got a PhD too. He's not, this is his area of specialty, that he's talking about these issues. Yeah, Scott Carter's a Mormon. Oh, that's right, he is too, yeah. Okay, so there you go, fair enough. So this guy's talking about, I think this virus is worse than what the media is saying. And then after about, you get to the end of his 10-minute video, and then you say, if you want to find out more, you can pay to become a member of, what does he call himself? Not Prosperous Living or something like that. And I'll give you the tips for how you can protect yourself against coronavirus and how to stay safe. And I'm like, oh no. Oh no. Really? Oh. And then there was another one, someone else who I watched semi-regularly, and they posted a video about it and went straight to the sort of conspiratorial angle. It's kind of frustrating. There's enough of that going on in the media. Jeremy says, I saw Contagion, but I don't remember what happens. Well, remember that the virus comes to America, and then Matt Damon has to take I think one of his kids dies, and then he has to take his other kid and escape, and keep them safe. And then eventually they have a vaccine. They find a vaccine. Remember, it takes place in different spots. What's her name? Rose from Titanic. Was in it. She plays a virologist. Is she a virologist or some sort of immunoscientist or something, who goes and works for is it CDC or the World Health Organization, and she ends up getting the virus herself. And like, there's all these different people. Kate Winslet, that's right. Kate Winslet, man. Thank you, Julio. Mod M, thank you for the £2 from England, obviously. £2 super chat. He says, are you Catholic or Protestant? That's a good question. Have a guess. See if you can guess. Wrong answers only. Stefan says Protestant, so there's one guess. Julia says ha ha ha. I all hail the UK, says CGM. I'm Catholic. I'm Catholic, but I spent 10 years as a very anti-Catholic Protestant. I'm Christian. Yeah. Man of the resurrection is what I am. So there you go. I've come out of the closet, so to speak. It won't be long before that's a thing again. People hiding themselves away. Stefan, I love how you put Christian with a big exclamation mark at the end of it. Christian, burn him now! You're a heretic. Mod says, surely you're not a heretic. It's a heretic, not an heretic. A good Protestant friend of mine who I'm doing some work for, actually, he runs a big series of conferences around New Zealand. I'm speaking at his conferences this year. He was contacted me yesterday and about something, and he says, "Oh, you're all right for a heretic." Yeah, it's funny, eh? I think there's a lot more closeted Christians out there than people know, and also I think a lot more people who are now, I think they're not necessarily lining up to get baptized, but who I think are giving Christianity a second look because they're starting to question. Funny, I spoke at a conference last year actually, and a guy turned up. There's an atheist. He's from England, by the way, too. Still had the thick Pommy accent. Yeah, no, Stefan, don't worry. I was only having you on, mate. I didn't think you were saying. But he's an English guy. He came to this conference I spoke at, and I was talking about the loss of authentic community in the West and why it's broken down, and the sort of 7 or 8 different streams that have all come together at once, from ideology to sort of corporate interests, consumerism, all these things that have all come together in a perfect storm to segregate and isolate people away from each other. Jeremy says, I'm a heathen. Right, burn him now. Bring me the sticks. We're going to have a fire, children. So what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. I can't even remember what I was talking about. That's so classic. Thank you for interrupting me like that, Jeremy. Prompting me to want to light a fire. Oh, that's right. Conference. Speaking of conference last year, this guy turns up, he's English, and I'm talking about the loss of authentic community in the West, why it's all broken down. And he comes up to me afterwards, and there was a Q&A session. I had a room, and people come in and just unpack the topic a bit more deeply and ask you questions. So he just tells a story, and he says, look, I'm a probably atheist. He says, with some agnostic tendencies maybe. He says, I'm not a Christian, but I've come to this conference, and particularly I wanted to hear this talk in particular, because he says, I've realised a few years ago that the West was in a real mess. I looked around at the state of politics, the state of society, and I've got kids, and I'm worried about my kids' future. And he said, it got me thinking, why do we have human rights? Where do these rights come from? Where did society arise from in the West? And all these kind of big questions. And he said, I realised that Christianity was quite central to all of that. And so he now attends this conference once a year so that he can know more about his own cultural heritage as a person from the West, that he then, so he says, I can actually better inform my kids. It's classic. And I think there's a lot more of that. People who are genuinely, they're sort of interested in realising, there's a bit more to this. It's not all just nutty religious nut jobs with weird superstitions and funny, strange anti-science beliefs. There's actually a lot more substance to this. And there's the history of it has been quite important for the West. It's not just the moments where people have failed and committed grave atrocities, but there's also a lot that's really important. So yeah, anyway, a Catholic versus Protestant fight. I'm a Catholic. Let the denomination war begin. That'll be hilarious. Remember the great meme war? Wow, Left Foot Media started the great denomination war of 2020. Yeah, here's the thing. Yeah, I'm a big subscriber, by the way, if those who are wondering, to what I call the C.S. Lewis school of things, or the Mere Christianity school of things. And in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis writes about the fact that an Orthodox Catholic who can look at the creed, the Christian Apostles' Creed, and recite every statement and believe it to be true, and an Orthodox Protestant who does the same thing, we have more in common than I would with a liberal Catholic who says, it's all rubbish, or a Protestant would with a liberal Protestant who says, it's all rubbish. So yeah, I'm a subscriber to that. Mods calling for a crusade already. Things have already got out of hand. By the way, that's why my channel's called Left Foot Media. I thought that would have been the big dead giveaway, because a left footer it's an old slang. It was a derogatory term that was used to describe Catholics. They're left footers, they were called. Now, apparently the reason they were called left footers was because there was a certain, back in the day when you had your spade for digging the garden, I guess digging up the potatoes in Ireland, whatever it was that you were digging with your spade, it had two pegs. Someone's calling Daya's fault. It had two pegs on it for your feet, and there was a left and a right peg. Shovels tended to be pegged on both sides, and for digging. Now, there's apparently though one particular Catholic region, for no reason, there's no weird superstition or anything, as far as I'm aware, but for one particular reason, there's this Catholic region that produced shovels that only had a left foot peg. And so that's where the nickname came from. And Catholics, people started calling them left footers. I've been called goofy footer. I don't mind that, because we've got a family tradition of boxing, and my younger brother and I, he was the better surfer than I was. A little bit of surfing when I was younger. I wasn't the greatest, he was. And the whole goofy footer thing. So, yeah, that's where Left Foot Media comes from. So yeah, there you go, you've learned something now. I enjoy, as you do, Stefan says, Red Letter Media. Do you think they are leaning left, or they just satirise everybody? I think they're an equal opportunity employer, and I would not be surprised. I don't know, I watch them and have been watching them for years, and I love their content, and I disagree with some of their film analysis. There's been films that they've really lampooned or have been critical of that I've disagreed with. Other times, yeah, in absolute agreement. And there's a lot that I would agree with them on. And more importantly, I really like the soundness of their critique about film technique and story writing technique. I think that's quite important. But are they left-leaning or... Well, this is the beauty of it. If you have to ask that question, are these people left or are they right? I think it's funny. I've had people ask that of me on this channel. They they've said, I can't figure you out because you don't seem to go either way. I'm not deliberately trying to be a centrist. I'm not trying to avoid controversy. I think it's a good sign. I think it means that you've got people who actually are saying something of substance that's about more than just transcends politics. I'm not interested in political talking points. And by the way, politics isn't going to save the world. You've got to fix your culture, because politics is always downstream from the cultural problems. So get your own life in order. And then the more people that do that, the better the culture will be, and then the better the politics will be that is born out of that culture. Anyway, that's another story. But the fact that you're asking, the fact Jeremy says, I think there's truth in all religions except Mormonism. They're crazy. Am I right? Waka waka. Well, Mormonism's a cult, right? So there's a bit of a difference there. But anyway, that's another story. And there's an interesting history around Mormonism. This is something that I've studied about Joseph Smith and how Mormonism started. There's a guy called Solomon Spaulding who worked in a printer's office with Joseph Smith. And Solomon Spaulding wrote an imaginary tale about these great civilizations coming to America. Solomon Spaulding died. And I guess nothing more was thought of his manuscript. He's an unknown character to history. Then all of a sudden, a few years later, the Book of Mormon turns up, and Solomon Spaulding's widow, to her deathbed, swore that the Book of Mormon was her husband's manuscript that Joseph Smith had stolen. And, the whole plates of Nephi story and how the angel showed him where the plates were, and that's where he got the story. And he changed the story, I think it was 7 times the story changed. And then he died in the gunfight. And there is some evidence now that he may have even shot himself to get out of paying the price for his criminal activity. But yeah, Mormonism is fascinating. But now they're a super force. I think I read an article recently. I think they're they were the third largest financial force institution or power, if you want to call it that, in the States. Just their involvement in industry and oil and farming and stuff like that. On oil, sorry. I don't know. Do they own oil shares or anything? But in farming and agriculture and things like that. So there you go. And I've got a few friends who are Mormons. They're genuinely good people. Anyway, yeah, they are. My experience too of Mormons, that we've got some that live around the corner. They're genuinely nice people. There was a funny incident that happened within Mormonism a couple of decades ago actually, where there was a Mormon husband and wife researchers, and they opened up all their archives to let them write a book about the history of Mormonism. I think it was the anniversary coming up or something. This husband and wife went through the archives and saw all the documents and realised, oh gosh, the history of this religious cult that we're part of is really dodgy. And so they decided to change tact, and they wrote an expose. And they published, unbeknownst to the Mormons, they published this expose. And the Mormons, the hierarchy of the Mormon church, I guess, were quite shocked when they found out that they'd published not what they were expecting, but an expose. They apparently immediately tried to go out and buy as many copies as they could, but that amplified the problem because it became a bestseller. I can't remember the name of the husband and wife. It's a funny story anyway. Anyway, Red Letter Media, getting back to Red Letter Media before we wind things up. Yeah, someone says to me, Mac Dan Sav says, really great to have a YouTuber that discusses these issues openly without swearing and hateful comments. Good witness. Well, thanks, mate. I'm not a saint by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a pretty flawed critter, but I do believe that a couple of things. I drop a few swear words when I get things dropped on my foot and all the rest of it. I'm not perfect, but I do believe as much as possible that I've always had this idea that swearing is sort of a refuge for those who don't really know how to speak their mind properly, so they just go to the obscene language as a refuge. So I try to and secondly, I think there's something about sort of regulating your speech that's good for virtue as well, and a bit of self-control. And thirdly, I just don't think hateful comments and stuff like that are helpful. We're talking about human persons here, and it just fuels the whole, it's disagreements, but it's about human persons. As human persons, we might disagree on some very big questions, but we are still human persons. And your view of the world doesn't make you any less of a person, doesn't mean that you have any less dignity than I do. And so I really believe that you should live that out, and that should actually be practiced. Yeah, it's funny, eh? I had a funny story about swearing. where my eldest daughter, who's now 12, she was about 2.5 at the time, and I had built a gate. I had to build a purpose-fit gate for the fence in our old house. And I'd put up all this fencing, and there was this extra wide pathway, and I couldn't buy a standard width gate to fit, so I had to build the thing from scratch. And I built this thing, and it was big, and it was like a farm gate, slightly higher than normal, and so it just weighed a ton. And I was putting it onto the pins, the 2 gudgeon pins that it sits on, swings on the hinges. And I was dropping it onto the pins. It looked like it was lined up. It wasn't. And it wasn't quite properly on one of the pins, and so it slipped off both pins, and it dropped my foot, just right into the middle of my foot. Boom! The full weight of this thing. And I was just in agony, and I was like, far out! Except I didn't say far out, and I was in agony. Now my little daughter, who's 2.5 at the time, I didn't know this, is standing right behind me. And what does she say? She yells out, far out, as loud as she could as well. Oh God! And it was in that moment I realised, man, they really are sponges. I need to love my kids well and model good behaviour to them. Anyway, so red letter media, I think there's a good thing about red letter media, the fact that we're having to ask the question, are they left or right? That's a really good sign that there's something a bit more than politics going on, and I think that's true. And I think also the interesting thing about, I'm intrigued by red letter media. I wouldn't be surprised to discover that maybe Mike, Mike maybe, or I wouldn't be surprised to discover they have Catholicism in their background, or some sort of mainline Protestantism. I just wouldn't be surprised. Just the way they talk about some issues, when those issues sort of can't. There's interesting things. There's a what you might call an ethical language, a vision of reality that you sort of recognise, and it's I wouldn't be surprised. And I think they're great. I love red letter media. Right? They have. I think they are. What I love about them is they are huge. A lot of people don't. It's amazing. People forget just how big they are. There are really big celebrities and writers and producers who are watching their content. It's very easy. In some ways, they're almost like the Beck. Beck, because a musician's musician. These guys are kind of like the YouTuber's YouTuber. And a lot of people have not, it's obvious, a lot of people have copied their style, that's for sure. You can see that in their content. But also there's people who are in the industry who clearly look to these guys and have regard for them. And I think rightly so. But the amazing thing is, they are really humble. They are not, in the sense that they're just honest about their opinions. They don't pander. As far as I can tell, they're not pandering to anybody. They tell you what's garbage when they see it, and what they think is garbage and what they think is good. They're not trying to win celebrity endorsements. They're not trying to play the game. And it's actually really refreshing. It's one of the reasons probably why I love watching them so much, even when I disagree with them. It's because you just know it's an honest conversation. And you know that they're speaking honestly. Especially if you haven't seen it already, you should watch The Nerd Crew. The Nerd Crew, I think, is brilliant. Brilliant satire. That's really Mod M says they're quite anti-Catholic, I thought. So I don't know. I don't know if I read it that way. I think, maybe, who knows. But yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, regardless, I think it's great that we're even asking the question, because it points to the fact there's a bit more going on with red letter media. Yeah, Jeremy says, I wonder how much money they make off their videos. I wondered that myself. They probably I think they've got a good bunch of patrons on Patreon as well. They've got good support that way. I think, I'd imagine the advertising revenue they'd be making, and probably they've taken a bit of a hammering. David says, I find them entertaining even though they hate everything DC movies. And to be fair, they're critical of Marvel as well, and Star Wars, the whole shebang. I think what they like is they like good storytelling. They're probably like people like you and I, right? They like good storytelling. That's what they're looking for, good stories. I wonder how much they make in the videos. Well, I'd say the ad apocalypse has hit hard, man. It's hit a lot of people hard. And it's funny with this channel, because I'm not huge, right? But I was on a trajectory, and particularly with the revenue level, you're thinking, great, this is just, it'll help build to that next level. And then blooming apocalypse comes along and you're like, oh well, just keep digging, see what happens, you know. They would have been hit, but I would say that the view count that they get and everything else, you know, and they've seemed to have made a successful business out of it. So I'm in the early days, I wondered, were they doing other stuff on the side? Were they doing editing on the side as a business, or were they, you know, some people do, or were they doing, I don't know, some sort of film production work on the side, just commercial stuff, wedding videos, that kind of thing. I did wonder whether they're doing that as well, but I think, by the looks of it, they've made quite a successful crack of it, and rightly so. I love, by the way, as I said, I love the Nerd Crew. I think the Nerd Crew is great satire. It's astounding to me. They're just, and they've got it right. They've got it perfect. That whole shtick of, Jeremy says they have a VCR repair shop. Hey Jeremy, I don't think it's real. Has anybody seen The Wedding Singer? Love The Wedding Singer. My wife and I watched it on New Year's Eve. A great film. It's called a CD, Jules. Yeah. Modium says they hate Man of Steel. I agree. I couldn't get my head around that either. And I know they complained about the frenetic energy and the pace and all the visuals, but I'm like, it's not that bad. Like, it does get intense, but it doesn't. I don't know. It seems to me they were quite overly sensitive to that. And I quite like Man of Steel. I thought it was a good film. I thought it was the best way you could go with Superman. I think what it is, they've got a nostalgic love for the old Superman, and the nostalgic love for things often colours our view of the world. And we think everything can be magic like that, just like that all over again. If you made that same Superman today, and by the way, they did, I've made a whole video about this, they tried that. It was the Brennan Roth one, made by, what's his name? Who's in trouble, he's got a checkered history, X-Men, Bryan Singer. And it didn't work. Halfway house between the serious and the cheesy, and it didn't work. Just didn't work at all. So, yeah. Someone says, were they pandering to the Alphabet Crew when they made the whole Jay marries Mr. Plinkett? I don't think they were. I think it's just them being stupid. That through line is just classic. The Mr. Plinkett thing. Oh, it's gold. Stefan says, would like to see you collaborate with Mauler. Yeah, and I follow him on Twitter. I think he follows me on Twitter, and every now and then there's a bit of a like or a brief comment. But yeah, I'd be happy to collaborate with Mauler. I like his videos. I really like. I like his style. The sardonic, scathing, no holds barred. Here's what's wrong with this style. Now, I should say, what's happening. I'm going to have to wrap things up. We have to move on. But a couple of things to say. Just a reminder, PayPal link below if you want to contribute. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the super chats. Next week, I'm away next week. I'm working next week. I'm on the road. So I don't think, if I do, it'll be a bit of a miracle because I'll be in another place and the internet connection might not be that good. In fact, I think the internet connection will not be reliable enough for me to be able to live stream. So, and whether I have time in between lectures that I'm delivering, whether I have the ability to actually get into a live stream. So at this stage, it's safe to assume, unless you see otherwise, that there's no live stream next week. However, the week after, I will be back. And the week after, I'm going to do something that you've been asking for. I've been working on my list of top 10 movies of the last decade. Top 10 movies, my pick for top 10 movies that were released in the last decade from 2000 to 2020. What I think those films were. And I don't know whether 1917 might make the list, whether I'll see it in time. Parasite's another one. But I'm just going to treat them maybe as 2020 movies, not 2019 films, and cheat a little bit that way if I don't have a chance to see them. But yeah, you guys are awesome as per usual. It's always awesome to have the live chat with you guys. It's great to be here. And as I said, Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, it's number 1 on my list of top 10 movies. Number 2 is The Last Jedi, and number 3 is The Force Awakens. I was so tempted when I was looking at the movies that have been released in the last decade to create a dummy list to see if I could fool people. And put some absolute atrocious. Maybe I should make an atrocious films of the last decade list as well. But yeah, so top 10 movies of the last decade. I guess there'll be other movie news to talk about as well, and entertainment news and stuff in general. and just general philosophy of life and everything else. I'm also, by the way, trying to get the Forge live streams happening again, probably on a monthly basis, I think is realistic. But the Forge live stream, for those who haven't participated in one before, is focused on issues around masculinity, and especially for men. If there's stuff you want me to talk about, topic ideas and things, please contact me. Let me know, and just for the Forge live streams, because I'm sort of looking to put together a content list for that for this year. Other than that, you guys are awesome, and thanks for watching. Don't forget PayPal. See you next time on Left Foot Media. See you around.